The Greyhound station on Millard Avenue smelled the way November always smells in Clover Falls, like wet concrete and something burning far away that no one bothers to investigate. I stood on the cracked pavement with 2 black trash bags at my feet, each one bulging at the seams with 43 years of accumulated living. A cardigan Gerald gave me for our 20th anniversary. My good reading glasses in their cracked case. 3 pairs of shoes, 2 of which I hadn't worn since his funeral. The bags were knotted at the top, the way you'd tie off a bag of kitchen garbage before dragging it to the curb. That detail didn't escape me. It was 7:48 in the morning. The cold had that particular November sharpness to it. Not the dramatic cold of January that people write poems about, but the mean, petty cold of early winter that finds the gap between your collar and your ear and stays there. I hadn't eaten. I'd been awake since 4 a.m., binged lying in the dark of what used to be my bedroom, listening to the house breathe around me for what I already knew would be the last time. James's car, a silver Nissan Altima, the one I gave him the down payment for in 2019, though Kelly had never acknowledged that fact, was idling at the curb 10 feet away. He hadn't pulled into a parking space. He hadn't turned off the engine. That detail told me everything his mouth hadn't said yet. I watched the exhaust curl up from the tailpipe and disappear into the gray sky, and I thought about how a running engine means a person expects to leave quickly. There were 3 other people at the station that morning. An older man in a Vietnam veteran's cap, sleeping upright on a bench, his chin tucked to his chest with the practiced dignity of someone who has learned to rest without looking vulnerable. A teenage girl with purple earbuds and a rolling suitcase, texting with both thumbs, utterly unaware that the world outside her screen was conducting its small, devastating dramas. A station attendant behind the smudged glass of the ticket window, stirring a cup of coffee with a pen, because apparently he had no spoon. Nobody looked at me. That was fine. I have lived 63 years on this earth, and I have learned that the moments that break you open rarely have an audience. James got out of the car. He was wearing the navy fleece I'd given him 2 Christmases ago, and for one disorienting second, seeing him walk toward me in that fleece, his shoulders hunched against the cold, his hands shoved in his pockets, he looked exactly like the boy who used to fall asleep on my lap during Sunday afternoon movies. 12 years old, sock feet hanging off the couch cushion, completely trusting that the world was a safe and ordered place because his mother was in it. That boy and this man wore the same face. That was the cruelest part. "Mom." He stopped 3 feet away. He didn't close the distance. "You've got everything?" I looked at the 2 trash bags. "I have what was packed for me," I said. He flinched. Good. I hadn't said it to wound him, or maybe I had a little. But either way, the flinch told me some part of him still knew the difference between right and wrong. That part just hadn't been loud enough lately. "It's not—" He stopped, rubbed the back of his neck. "It wasn't working, Mom. The living situation. It was getting complicated." Complicated. That was Kelly's word. I recognized it the way you recognize a song playing in the next room. Not quite audible, but unmistakable. "She used that word?" I asked. "Complicated?" James looked at the cracked pavement. "It's just, the house feels crowded. Kelly has her plans for the space, and she wants a yoga studio," I said. "I know, she told me." He looked up then, surprised maybe that I wasn't crying, that I wasn't bargaining. I had done my crying 4 months ago, alone in the bathroom with the faucet running so no one would hear, when I first understood that my son had chosen a side and it wasn't mine. By the time November came, I was past tears. I had moved through grief and come out somewhere quieter on the other side, somewhere that felt strangely like solid ground. "The bus to Asheville leaves at 8:15, I said. "I've already looked it up. I can give you some money." "I don't need your money, James." That landed differently than I intended, and I watched him recalibrate, trying to figure out what I meant by it. He didn't ask. He never asked the follow-up question. That had always been his limitation. That incuriosity about the interior lives of people who loved him. Kelly had understood that about him before I did. She had built an entire architecture of control on the foundation of his incuriosity. I reached into the right pocket of my wool coat. The envelope was there, letter-sized, white, sealed with a small piece of tape because I hadn't wanted to lick it and taste the glue. I held it out to him. "Give this to Kelly," I said. "It's my parting gift for cleaning out my room so thoroughly." He took it without looking at it. Turned it over once in his hands, the way people handle things they're slightly afraid of, but won't admit to being afraid of. "What is it?" "Something she'll want to read," I said. "Make sure she opens it today." He nodded. He was already leaning back toward the car, that gravitational pull of the running engine, the life he'd chosen, the woman waiting at home who was already in her mind, measuring the yoga studio walls. "Mom," he said it like there was something enormous behind it. Like 41 years of everything between us was pressing against that one syllable, trying to get out. I picked up my trash bags. "The bus," I said gently, "doesn't wait." I watched him get in the car. I watched the silver Altima pull away from the curb, merge into the thin morning traffic on Millard Avenue, and disappear. The station attendant was still stirring his coffee with his pen. I walked to the ticket window and bought a one-way ticket to Asheville, North Carolina, $47, which I paid in cash. And I sat down on the bench next to the sleeping veteran, and I put my hands in my lap, and I breathed. In my coat pocket, my phone had one unread text from a contact labeled simply R. Hess. It read, "Everything is in place. Travel safe, Martha." I smiled for the first time all morning. There is a specific kind of freedom that only becomes possible after you have lost everything that was never really yours to lose. I didn't know that at 40. I didn't know it at 50, but sitting in that Greyhound station on a cold November morning with 2 trash bags at my feet and a one-way ticket in my hand, I felt it settle over me like the first warm room after a long time out in the cold. I was 63 years old. I was just getting started. Gerald died on a Tuesday in March, which felt wrong. Gerald was a Sunday kind of man. Slow mornings, good coffee, the newspaper spread across the kitchen table in overlapping sections that I always pretended to find annoying and secretly loved. He deserved a Sunday death, quiet and unhurried. Instead, he got a Tuesday, a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and cafeteria soup, and me holding his hand while a machine made decisions his body no longer could. He was 67. We had plans. The house on Birchwood Lane went very quiet after that. I don't mean quiet the way people mean when they say a house is peaceful. I mean the specific, cellular quiet of a space that has lost its organizing principle. Gerald had been the house's heartbeat without either of us knowing it. After he was gone, I'd walk from room to room and feel the silence as a physical presence, something with weight and temperature, something that sat across from me at dinner and said nothing. James called in those early months, regularly at first, then weekly, then on Sundays when he remembered. He was grieving too in his way, the compressed, logistical grief of busy men who process loss between meetings. I understood it. I didn't hold it against him. It was James who suggested I move in. It was April, 14 months after Gerald passed. We were on the phone. I was in the kitchen, eating crackers because I hadn't bothered to cook a real meal in 3 days. And James said, "Mom, you shouldn't be alone in that big house. We have the space. Come stay with us for a while." For a while. I should have pressed him on that phrase. In my experience, for a while is the most dangerous interval in the English language. It's long enough to unpack, but short enough to revoke without warning. I said yes because I was eating crackers alone at 7 p.m., and the house was so quiet I'd started leaving the television on just to hear voices. I moved into the guest room at 14 Birchwood Lane on a Saturday in May, with Gerald's old truck loaded with boxes that James and his neighbor helped carry in. Kelly stood at the kitchen island the entire time, directing traffic with a cup of matcha in her hand, telling people where not to put things. She hugged me once, briefly, one of those hugs that is really just two people touching shoulders, and said, "We're so glad you're here, Martha. This is going to be wonderful." I believed her. That was my first mistake. Not the last, but the first. The changes were slow enough that I questioned my own perception of them. That is the sophistication of Kelly's particular cruelty. It never announced itself. It arrived in small installments, each one individually dismissible, collectively devastating. First, it was my photos. I'd arranged 3 framed photographs on the small dresser in my room. Gerald and me at Niagara Falls in 1987. James at his college graduation. A blurry snapshot of all 3 of us at Christmas the year James turned 9. Small things. Private things. One afternoon I came back from my walk and they were gone, replaced by a white ceramic diffuser emitting something that smelled like eucalyptus and corporate ambition. When I asked Kelly about it, she smiled with all her teeth and said, "I just thought the room could use some freshening. The frames were looking a little dated. I put them in the hall closet, top shelf, I think." Top shelf, where a 5'3", 62-year-old woman could not reach without a step stool. Then it was the dinners. Kelly had adopted a meal plan. Clean eating, she called it, though I privately thought there was nothing clean about food that gave you no pleasure, and the kitchen became her managed territory. When I offered to cook on Sundays the way I always had, the way James had loved since childhood, she thanked me warmly and explained that they were really trying to be intentional about what they put in their bodies. James, sitting at the island, nodded without looking up from his phone. I started eating a lot of toast in my room. Then Diane arrived. Kelly's mother came for a long weekend in September and immediately made herself at home in the way that certain women do. Not rudely, exactly, but with the cheerful assumption that her comfort was everyone's priority. She and Kelly spent 2 days walking through the house together, murmuring to each other in the particular register that excludes without explicitly excluding. On Sunday morning, I came downstairs to find them at the kitchen table with graph paper. "Oh, Martha!" Diane looked up with a bright smile. "We're just doing some dreaming. Kelly's been wanting to redo the layout of the upstairs for ages." "The guest room?" I asked. Kelly looked at her graph paper. "It gets the best morning light in the house," she said. "It's wasted as a bedroom, honestly. I've always thought it would make a perfect yoga studio." She said it the way you'd say something you'd thought of just now, casually, as if the idea had no weight. But she didn't look at me when she said it. And Diane was looking at her graph paper with the focused attention of someone who already knows exactly how the conversation ends. I went back upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed, Gerald's old quilt folded across the foot of it, and I thought about the word wasted. That was October. By November, Kelly had stopped pretending. I came back from my Thursday morning walk, 45 minutes, the same route I'd walked since May, down Birchwood to the park and back, and found my bedroom door open. Kelly was inside. She had pulled my sweaters from the closet and was folding them with aggressive, practiced efficiency, the way you fold things you have decided you are done with. Each sweater went into a black trash bag held open by the handles of my closet door. She didn't look up when I appeared in the doorway. "It's long overdue, Martha." Her voice was pleasant in the way that a locked door is pleasant, smooth, impenetrable. "This house needs new energy. You're occupying a room that's going to be my yoga studio. James agrees, don't you, honey?" I looked to the doorway on the other side of the room. James was there. He had his hands in the pockets of his navy fleece, and he was looking at a point somewhere between the floor and the window. That middle distance men find when they have decided that what is happening is not, technically, their fault. He didn't speak. He reached to his left, where 2 flattened trash bags hung from the doorknob, and he held them out to me. I have replayed that image 10,000 times since. My son, his outstretched hand. The black plastic rustling softly in the draft from the hallway. I took the bags. Not because I was defeated, not because I had nowhere to go. I took them because I had been waiting, patiently, quietly, with the long-practiced calm of a woman who taught 31 years of 6th grade and knows that you do not stop a lesson midway through just because the students have stopped paying attention. I took them because the lesson wasn't over. It was just about to begin. The Greyhound to Asheville smelled like upholstery cleaner and someone's fast food from 2 stops back, and I found it extraordinarily comforting. I had a window seat, which I'd specifically requested when I bought my ticket. The woman at the counter had seemed mildly surprised that anyone still had a preference about such things, but she'd been kind enough to check. The seat next to me was empty. My 2 trash bags were in the overhead compartment, which had required some negotiation with the overhead compartment, but we'd reached an agreement. My coat was folded on my lap. My good reading glasses, the ones in the cracked case, rescued from the sweater drawer before Kelly could fold them into a trash bag, were on my nose. Outside the window, Clover Falls was doing what Clover Falls always does in November, looking like a place that has given up on color for the season. The gas stations and strip malls along Route 9 gave way gradually to bare-limbed trees and frozen fields, and then we were on the highway. And then Clover Falls was simply gone, the way places go when you stop looking at them. I exhaled. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath for 4 months. The bus had that particular quality of suspended time that I remembered from long drives with Gerald. The sense that the world outside is moving while you remain briefly, mercifully still. I watched the gray Ohio landscape scroll past, and I let myself feel the full weight of the morning before I put it somewhere manageable. The trash bags, the running engine, James's outstretched hand holding black plastic, Kelly's voice, new energy, long overdue, pleasant and impenetrable as a locked door. I let myself feel it. Then I took my phone from my coat pocket. Robert Hess picked up on the second ring, which was typical. Robert had been picking up on the second ring since 1994, when Gerald first retained him to handle the refinancing on Birchwood Lane. In 30 years, I had never once reached his voicemail. I suspected he considered voicemail a form of professional failure. Martha. His voice was exactly what it always was, dry, unhurried, faintly amused by the general absurdity of human affairs. "You're on the bus?" "I'm on the bus." "Good. How are you feeling?" I considered the question with genuine attention, the way Robert's questions always deserved. "Like a woman who just put down something very heavy," I said. "Is everything filed? Sent to the property management server at 8 a.m. this morning, per your instructions." I heard him turn a page. "The lease adjustment notice is formally registered. It cites the standard 60-day grace period, but given the irregularities, specifically the absence of any signed rental agreement for the past 31 months, I've moved to accelerate the timeline, 15 days for voluntary compliance, or we initiate proceedings. And the back rent calculation? $4,200. 31 months at the adjusted market rate for the Clover Falls area, minus the nominal contribution James has been making to utilities, which Kelly has been listing in her household budget as maintenance fees." A brief pause that contained, I knew, a great deal of Robert's private opinion about Kelly's household budget. "It's airtight, Martha. There is no version of this they can challenge successfully. The Caldwell Family Revocable Trust has been the sole title holder of 14 Birchwood Lane since March 2019. James's name is not on the deed. It never has been." "He doesn't know that," I said. "No," Robert agreed. "He does not." Gerald had been the one to insist on the trust structure. This surprised people who knew him. Gerald was a warm, instinctive man, not given to the cold geometries of estate planning. But he had grown up poor in a way that left certain permanent marks, and one of those marks was a deep, specific terror of being left without ground to stand on. He'd sat across from Robert in that downtown office in the spring of 2001 and said, with a simplicity that moved me even now, "I want to make sure Martha always has somewhere that belongs to her. Whatever happens. Whatever happens." Gerald had not specified what he imagined might happen. He was not a suspicious man. He simply understood, with the bone-deep pragmatism of someone who had once had nothing, that the world was not reliably kind, and that paperwork was a form of love. I had not told James about the trust structure after Gerald died. This was not deception, exactly. James had never asked, had never shown particular interest in the administrative details of the estate, had signed the documents Robert placed in front of him at the reading without reading them closely. I had told myself I would explain it when the time was right. Then Kelly arrived, and the time was never right, and then gradually I understood that the omission had become something else. Not a secret I was keeping, but a test I was administering. I had not designed it as a test. It became one. The moment I understood what was happening, the moment the test began in earnest, was a Thursday evening in late July, 4 months before the bus station. James and Kelly had friends over for dinner, a couple named the Hendersons whose names I could never keep straight because they had the same haircut. I had eaten earlier in my room, which had become standard practice, and I came downstairs for a glass of water and heard Kelly in the kitchen, her voice low and carrying the particular frequency of a woman who doesn't care if she's overheard. She doesn't contribute anything, James. She's not a guest anymore. She's a fixture. And it's your house. You could just tell her it's time. Your house. I stood in the hallway with my empty glass, and I let those 2 words rearrange everything I thought I understood about the situation. She didn't know. After 31 months of living in my house, Kelly Caldwell had never once looked at a property record, had never asked James to show her a deed, had built her entire strategic campaign on an assumption she'd never bothered to verify. I went back upstairs. I called Robert the next morning. I told him I was ready. The condo in Asheville had been under contract since August, a 2-bedroom unit on the 4th floor of a building called the Ridgeline, with a south-facing balcony and a view of the mountains that had made me stand in the empty living room during the walkthrough and put my hand over my mouth. Carol had found it. Carol, who had been my best friend since we were 19 years old and sitting next to each other in an education theory class that neither of us understood, had moved to Asheville 6 years ago and had been telling me to follow her ever since. "When you're ready," she'd said every time. "Whenever you're ready, there's room." In the overhead compartment, my trash bag shifted slightly as the bus took a curve. The envelope I'd given James contained 2 documents. The first was the lease adjustment notice, Robert's letterhead, precise and merciless. The second was a single page, a copy of the property title for 14 Birchwood Lane, with the name of the title holder highlighted in yellow. Caldwell Family Revocable Trust. Martha J. Caldwell, Trustee. I had highlighted it myself the night before, sitting at the small desk in my room with a yellow marker and Gerald's reading lamp. I'd done it slowly and carefully, the way you do something you want to remember doing. Outside the window, Ohio was becoming Kentucky, the highway cutting through hills that were just beginning to suggest the shapes of mountains. My phone buzzed. A text from Carol. "ETA?" I typed back. "On the bus. Approx 6 hours. Don't fuss." 3 seconds later, "I'm already fussing." I made the guest room up with the good sheets. Also, I bought wine. I put the phone in my lap and looked out the window and let myself, for the first time in a very long time, feel something uncomplicated. Somewhere behind me, in a house on Birchwood Lane that had always been mine, James was walking through the front door with a white envelope in his hand. I wasn't there for this part. Everything I'm about to tell you came later, some from James, in fragments, during the phone calls that came after, and some I have assembled from what I know of Kelly, of that house, of the precise geometry of how certain reckonings arrive. I have tried to be fair. I have tried to tell it the way it happened rather than the way I wished it had happened, though I will admit the distance between those 2 things turned out to be smaller than I expected. James got home at 9:22 a.m. He knew the time because he checked his phone in the driveway before going in, the way he always did, one last look at the outside world before stepping into the interior one. He'd told me this detail later, not knowing why it mattered. The way people tell you the small things when the large things are too unwieldy to begin with. The house was already different. That was the first thing he noticed. Kelly had opened all the curtains on the upper floor. He could see the light from the driveway, and when he came through the front door, there was music playing, something with a driving, purposeful beat that Kelly used when she was in what she called her flow state, and what James privately called her demolition mode. The smell of the eucalyptus diffuser was everywhere, stronger than usual, as if she'd turned it up to commemorate the occasion. He stood in the entryway and listened. The sound was coming from upstairs, from my room. He found Kelly standing in the center of what had been my bedroom, with a yellow measuring tape extended between her hands, one end pressed to the window frame and the other held taut toward the opposite wall. She was wearing her good athleisure, the matching set she saved for occasions that felt ceremonial, and her hair was pulled back with the focused neatness of a woman executing a plan she has been rehearsing for months. The room was already half-emptied. The quilt Gerald's mother had made was folded on the bare mattress. The small braided rug from the foot of the bed was rolled and propped against the wall. The curtains, my curtains, the cream ones with the small embroidered edge that I'd hung myself the first week I moved in, were in a pile on the floor, already separated from their rings. 12 by 14, Kelly said, without looking up from the tape measure. It's actually bigger than I thought once the furniture's out. We could do a full mirror wall on the north side and still have room for the reformer. Kelly. James held up the envelope. She looked up then, saw it. Something crossed her face, brief, unreadable, gone before he could name it. And then she smiled and let the tape measure retract with a sharp mechanical snap. What's that? Mom said to give it to you. He set it on the windowsill, the nearest flat surface. She said to open it today. Kelly looked at the envelope the way she looked at most things that came from me, with the polite, faint contempt of someone who has already decided the contents are beneath them. She picked it up, turned it over, broke the tape seal with her thumbnail. She read the first document standing up. I know this because James told me she didn't sit down, that she read it standing at the window with the measuring tape still in her other hand, and that he watched her face the way you watch the sky when you think weather might be coming. The pleasant expression held for approximately the first 4 lines of Robert's letter. Then it didn't. What is this? Her voice was still controlled, a thin control stretched. I don't know. I haven't read it. She held it out. He read it. The lease adjustment notice was 3 paragraphs of Robert's precise, unhurried legal language, but the meaning arrived quickly and without ambiguity. The occupants of 14 Birchwood Lane had been residing in the property without a formal rental agreement for 31 months. The fair market rate for comparable properties in Clover Falls had been calculated. The resulting figure, $4,200, was owed to the trust within 15 days. Failure to remit payment or vacate would initiate formal eviction proceedings. James read it twice. Then he looked at the second document. The property title was a single page, official and plain. He read his own address at the top, 14 Birchwood Lane, Clover Falls, Ohio. And then he read the title holder line, and then he read it again. And then he put the paper down on the windowsill very carefully, the way you put down something that has changed the shape of the room. Caldwell Family Revocable Trust. Martha J. Caldwell, trustee. James. Kelly's voice had a new quality now, tight, pressurized, the voice of a woman whose blueprint has just been handed back to her with corrections. James, look at me. He was looking at the title document. How long have you known about this? I didn't, he said. I didn't know. You didn't. She stopped. Reset. Your father's estate. You signed documents. Robert Hess. You've met Robert Hess. I signed what he put in front of me. James looked up. Dad died, Kelly. I was grieving. I didn't read every page. She called Robert's office at 9:41 a.m. I know the time because Robert told me with the mild satisfaction of a man who had been anticipating the call. His assistant put her through. Robert listened to Kelly's opening statement, which, by his account, was energetic, and then explained, in the same unhurried tone he used for everything, that the trust documentation was properly filed, legally airtight, and had been in continuous effect since March 2019. He confirmed the 15-day timeline. He confirmed the back rent calculation. He wished her a good morning and ended the call. Kelly stood in the middle of my emptied bedroom for a long time after that. James sat on the edge of the bare mattress, on Gerald's old quilt, which Kelly had folded there without knowing whose hands had made it. And he held the title document, and he read his own mother's name, and he tried to trace backward through 31 months of his own life, looking for the moments where he might have asked a question and hadn't. There were many of them. The curtains were in a pile on the floor. The measuring tape was on the windowsill next to Robert's letter. Somewhere in the diffuser, the eucalyptus was still running, filling the room with its clean, aggressive scent. Kelly came and stood in the doorway, the same doorway where James had stood 3 hours earlier, holding out trash bags. The symmetry was not lost on him. He told me this later, in one of the fragments he offered like a man handing over evidence. I thought about that, standing there with the bags. I thought, she planned this. Mom planned all of this. He sat with that thought for a long time. Then he picked up his phone. He didn't call me, not yet. He wasn't ready for that conversation, and some part of him understood that he hadn't yet earned it. He called the one person he always called when the architecture of his life required emergency review. He called his mother's number. Then he stopped, put the phone face down on the quilt. Outside, the November wind moved through the bare birch trees on the front lawn. Inside, Kelly was making her own calls in the kitchen, her voice low and rapid, the cadence of a woman summoning reinforcements. He could hear Diane's name. He could hear the word lawyer several times. James sat alone on his mother's mattress in his mother's house and looked at his mother's name on a piece of paper and tried to remember the last time he had done something simply because it was the right thing to do. He was still trying to remember when his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. An Asheville area code. He let it ring. The bus pulled into Asheville at 3:47 in the afternoon. I know the exact time because I had been watching the clock on my phone with the focused attention of someone who has been in motion for 7 hours and needs the arrival to be real before they can believe it. The Asheville station was smaller than the one in Clover Falls, warmer in the particular way that mountain towns are warmer than flat ones. Not in temperature exactly, but in atmosphere, in the quality of the light, in the way the air arrived with something in it besides cold. Carol was standing at the curb. She was wearing her enormous red coat, the one she'd owned since 2009 that she refused to replace because, as she put it, it still keeps me warm, and I am 67 years old, and I am done making decisions based on aesthetics. And she had both arms open before I was fully off the bus steps. I walked into those arms, and she held on with the specific grip of a woman who has known you since you were 19 and has been waiting across 6 years and 400 miles to do exactly this. She didn't say anything for a moment. Neither did I. Then she pulled back and looked at my face with the frank, assessing attention she'd always had. Carol had been a school principal for 22 years, and she could read a person's interior weather the way other people read a clock. And she said, "You look tired and you look free. Those two things are not mutually exclusive." "No," I agreed. "They're not." She took one of my trash bags without being asked. We walked to her car. The ridgeline was 12 minutes from the station, up a winding road that climbed through bare-limbed trees and delivered you, with a kind of theatrical abruptness, to a building with clean, modern lines and a lobby that smelled of cedar and warm air. The elevator opened on the 4th floor. Carol had the key. She'd been holding it since the closing in August, storing it with the cheerful patience of someone who never doubted the day would come. Unit 4C. She unlocked the door and stood aside. I walked in. The living room was empty of furniture. My things were coming Thursday. A moving truck Gerald's old colleague had arranged at a rate that Robert had negotiated down to something reasonable. but the floors were warm oak, and the south-facing windows were full of late afternoon light, and the mountains were there, exactly as I remembered them from the walk-through, blue and layered and enormous in a way that made the inside of my chest do something I hadn't felt in years. I put my trash bags down on the oak floor. I walked to the window, and I put both hands on the glass, and I looked at those mountains, and I let Gerald be present for a moment. Not with grief, exactly, but with the particular tenderness of showing someone you love a thing you know they would have loved. He would have stood right here. He would have been quiet for a long time, and then he would have said something plain-spoken and exactly right. "This is yours, Marty. This is all yours." Behind me, Carol was opening a bottle of wine. My phone rang at 4:15. I knew before I looked. There was only one person whose call would arrive at this particular hour with this particular energy. The energy of someone who has spent 7 hours building to an explosion and has finally reached critical pressure. Kelly. I looked at Carol. Carol looked at my phone. She raised her eyebrows in a question. I picked up. "Martha." Kelly's voice arrived already mid-velocity, the way a car arrives when it has been accelerating for a long time before you see it. "What exactly is the meaning of this? Because I have just spent 4 hours on the phone with 2 different attorneys, and they are both telling me that this document is legitimate, and I need you to explain to me right now what kind of game you think you're—" "Kelly." My voice was the same temperature it always was. This seemed to destabilize her more than volume would have. "Take a breath." "I will not take a breath, Martha. I will not. Do you understand what you've done? Do you understand that we have 15 days? 15 days and $4,000, and James is sitting in that room not talking to me, and the lawyer says we have no—" "You said the house needed new energy," I said. Silence. Brief. Electric. "What?" "That's what you told me. Standing in my bedroom, folding my sweaters into trash bags. You said the house needed new energy." I watched the mountains through the window. The light was changing, the blue deepening toward evening. "Well, the new energy is me selling the property to a real estate investor I've been in contact with since September. He's very excited about the Clover Falls market. I think you'll find him a much more straightforward landlord than I turned out to be. You can't, Martha, you cannot just—" "You also said," I continued with the same unhurried calm, "that you were tired of setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm. I believe that was a Tuesday in August, at dinner, when you thought I was out of earshot. So, I let the word land. I've decided to take your advice. I no longer need to set myself on fire to keep you warm, Kelly. Enjoy your yoga studio." I could hear her breathing. "On the sidewalk," I added, "since that's where studios go when the lease expires." Carol, across the room, had both hands over her mouth. "This isn't over," Kelly said. The velocity was gone now. What replaced it was something colder, more considered. I recognized the shift. It was the same shift she'd made every time a social strategy failed, and she needed to recalibrate. Under other circumstances, I might have been wary of it. "It is, actually," I said. "Robert will be your point of contact from here. I'd recommend calling him in the morning. He picks up on the second ring." I ended the call. Carol made a sound that was half laugh, half something more complicated. She crossed the room and handed me a glass of wine, a Malbec, which she knew was the only kind I reliably liked, and she looked at me with the expression she'd been wearing since 1979, the one that meant, "I have always known you were capable of this." I took the wine. I took a long sip. I looked at the mountains. "She said it wasn't over," Carol said. "She's wrong," I said. My phone buzzed. I looked down. James. Carol saw it too. The room did the thing rooms do when something important is about to happen, became very still, very attentive, as if the walls were holding their breath. I looked at his name on the screen. I thought about a 12-year-old boy asleep on a couch, sock feet dangling off the cushion, completely certain the world was safe because I was in it. I thought about the man in the navy fleece in the driveway. I thought about the space between those two people and how you measure it, and whether the distance is permanent or just very, very far. I thought about Gerald, who had been a forgiving man without being a foolish one, who had understood that love and accountability were not opposites. I picked up James. His voice, when it came, was the voice of the 12-year-old, not performed, real. Stripped of the management speak and the Kelly cadence he'd accumulated over 15 years of marriage and ambition. Mom. A long pause. I didn't know. About the house. I want you to know that I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. Another silence, the kind that has texture to it. I'm sorry, he said. Mom, I'm sorry. I closed my eyes. Outside, the Asheville mountains were turning the color of a bruise at dusk, which is also the color of something healing. I know, I said again, softly. We'll talk, James. Not tonight. But we'll talk. I ended the call. Carol was watching me from across the room with her wine glass held in both hands and her red coat still on, because Carol runs cold and has never apologized for it. Well, she said. Well, I agreed. We stood at the window together and watched the mountains go dark, and Carol refilled my glass without asking. And somewhere in the city below us, the lights were coming on one by one, the way lights do when the day concedes to evening. Not all at once, but gradually, each one a small decision made against the dark. There was a knock at the door. I looked at Carol. Carol looked at me. I may, she said, with the specific expression of someone who has arranged something and is not entirely sorry about it, have told a few people you were arriving today. Carol had told 4 people. This is what she said, standing in the doorway of my empty condo with her hand on the door handle and her expression arranged into something approximating innocence. 4 people. A small, informal, nothing-to-fuss-about gathering of 4 individuals who happened to be in the neighborhood. There were 9 people in my living room within 20 minutes. I did not have furniture yet, so they sat on the floor and on the 2 folding chairs Carol had brought from her own apartment, and on the wide oak windowsills, and on the trash bags, my trash bags, the ones that had held my sweaters and my reading glasses and Gerald's anniversary cardigan, which somebody had propped against the wall, and which now served as casual seating for a woman named Bet, who was 71 years old and had the posture of someone who had never once in her life been uncomfortable. There was wine. Carol had bought 2 bottles, and a neighbor named Frank, who was 64 and recently retired from a career in civil engineering that he described as building things so other people could complain about them, had brought a 3rd. Someone produced a cheese board. Someone else brought crackers, the good kind, not the kind I'd been eating alone in my room at Birchwood Lane at 7 in the evening because I hadn't bothered to cook a real meal. I sat on the floor with my back against the south-facing window, and I looked at these people, most of whom I had met only once at Carol's dinner table during visits over the years. And I felt something I had not felt in so long that it took me several minutes to correctly identify it. I felt like myself. Not the self who had been quietly shrinking for 31 months in a house she owned but couldn't occupy fully. Not the self who ate toast in her room and got step stools to retrieve her own photographs from top shelves where they'd been relocated without apology. The self I mean is the one I'd been before all of that. The woman who taught 6th grade for 31 years and could hold a room of 30 11-year-olds with nothing but her presence. The woman Gerald had married. The woman who had, in the end, held her ground by simply knowing where it was. Bet, on the trash bag, asked me how I'd gotten to Asheville. I told her the broad version, the eviction, the bus, the envelope. I didn't editorialize. I didn't need to. The facts were sufficient. When I finished, Bet was quiet for a moment. Good, she said, simply and completely. Good. The moving truck arrived on Thursday. 2 men named Diego and Paul brought everything up in the elevator in 2 hours and 40 minutes, which was faster than I'd expected, and which Diego attributed to what he called good energy in the building. Gerald's armchair came first, then the kitchen table, then the boxes, 41 of them, which Paul counted with the methodical satisfaction of a man who finds meaning in accurate tallies. I unpacked slowly. I was in no hurry. For the first time in years, the timeline was mine. Gerald's quilt I unpacked first. I carried it to the bedroom and spread it across the new bed, a queen, which I had purchased specifically because I was 63 years old, and I had spent enough of my life sleeping on whatever size bed fit the available room. And I smoothed it flat with both hands, the way I had done 1,000 times. His mother had made it in 1962, the year Gerald turned 7. It was a pattern called Drunkard's Path, which Gerald had always found hilarious and which I had always loved for its implication that even wandering has a design, if you step back far enough to see it. I sat on the edge of the bed with my hands on the quilt. "This is yours, Marty. This is all yours." "I know," I said out loud to the empty room. "I know it is." The letter from James arrived on Saturday. Not a text. A letter, handwritten, on the kind of plain white paper that suggests a person sat down without a plan and simply wrote until the writing became honest. The envelope had my new address on it, which meant he had called Carol, which meant he had done at least one difficult thing of his own volition, which I noted. I made a cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen table, in my kitchen, in my home, and I opened it. I will not repeat everything he wrote. Some of it belongs only to the two of us, to the specific and irreplaceable language of a mother and son who have hurt each other and are trying to find their way back to something true. What I will say is that he wrote about his father. He wrote about the quilt. He wrote about Sunday afternoons on the couch when he was 12 years old, sock feet dangling, the television murmuring, the world entirely safe. He wrote, "I don't know when I stopped making decisions based on what was right and started making them based on what was easy. I think it happened slowly. I think I let it happen. I'm sorry, Mom. Not because of the house, because of you." I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and put it in the drawer of the small table by the window. Not in the trash, not in a box, in the drawer, which is where you put things you intend to return to. I did not call him that day, or the next. I was not ready to offer him the full grace of my forgiveness, and I still believe, that grace offered before it is fully felt is not grace at all. It is just another performance. He and I had both done enough performing. But I wrote his name on a piece of paper and put it next to the letter. That was my answer for now. A placeholder. A promise that the door existed, even if I wasn't ready to open it all the way. Kelly I did not hear from again. Robert handled everything with his customary efficiency. The investor closed on Birchwood Lane in December. The back rent was settled as part of the negotiation, and 14 Birchwood Lane passed out of the Caldwell Family Trust and into new hands on a Wednesday afternoon while I was at the farmer's market buying sweet potatoes and a succulent in a small clay pot that a young woman with paint-stained fingers was selling for $4. I bought the succulent. I carried it home and put it on the south-facing windowsill in the full afternoon light, which was where it wanted to be. Here is what I know, at 63, that I did not know at 40 or 50, or even 60. The space you occupy is not incidental. It is not a given. It is something you choose and defend and tend, the way you tend any living thing. I had spent years making myself smaller, quieter, more convenient, believing that love required the constant renegotiation of my own boundaries. Believing that a good mother was one who disappeared gracefully when asked. But Gerald had known better. Gerald, who grew up with nothing and became a man who put my name on a deed and said, "I want to make sure Martha always has somewhere that belongs to her." Gerald had understood something I'd had to learn the hard way, in a bus station, with 2 trash bags and a one-way ticket and an envelope that contained everything Kelly had never thought to verify. You cannot be thrown out of your own house, not if you know it's yours, not if you've always known. I stood at the south-facing window with my coffee, and I looked at the mountains, which were doing what the mountains always do in Asheville in late November, standing there, enormous and unhurried and entirely indifferent to the small human dramas occurring at their feet, which I found deeply comforting. The succulent on the windowsill was already reaching toward the light. I watched it for a while. Then I refilled my coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, and began a letter to my son. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of one.